Marie Gasper-Hulvat.
Juli-Ann Gasper.
We're standing in Moscow, Russia in the Tretiakov Gallery in front of a dual-sided icon from the 12th century from Novgorod, which is a town in Russia. The first side that we're going to look at is an icon of the Holy Face. So we have the face of Jesus Christ on a square panel surrounded by a circle, and you see 3 bars of the cross behind his head.
When was this made?
This was made in the second half of the 12th century.
It looks very modernistic.
It does, kind of, yeah.
Has a very modern feel.
Yeah. The style certainly gets echoed in terms of the simplicity of it. It gets echoed much later in very modern works of art. The formal qualities of it are very basic, very simple. The lines in his hair really stand out as paying attention to line and not trying to duplicate hair.
You could almost count the hairs on his head in this case.
Yeah, in this case you could. Not in his beard, though. His beard is done a very different way than his hair, which is interesting.
So it's very monochromatic, and so many of the icons we've seen have been very, very colorful with lots of different colors, and this is golds and browns.
It's true. So the story behind this icon, this is a type of icon. And the type of icon, it's an icon type is an image that is duplicated over and over and over again on many different panels. They're all the same quote-unquote icon because it's the same image. And icon means image in a certain way. So this image is, the story is that when at one point in time when Christ, I believe it was during his procession to be crucified, he wiped his face with the handkerchief of a woman that is now known as Veronica, and his face miraculously appears on this handkerchief after he wipes his face with it. So if you've heard of the Shroud of Turin, that's the same story. And in fact, the story of the Shroud of Turin shows up when the Italians have contact again with Byzantines in the Middle Ages. So the story of the Veronica's veil comes through Byzantine art to Italy and then also to Russia. So Byzantine art up through from the 5th century all the way up into here we have 12th century. So we have here a copy of the image from Veronica's veil. And Veronica, by the way, the word Vero Icona, Veronica, true image, true icon. So the name of this type of icon in Russian, in Greek, and it's translated in English, is Nirukotvorny, not made by human hands. So the idea being that this image was not made by humans, but came directly from the physical face of Christ and is duplicated. That idea of that physical connection to Christ's body.
Somebody didn't paint it.
It showed up. It was miraculous. So that's where this icon type comes from.
So this icon, we see this image in other places?
Yes, it shows up in many other towns. There would have been many of these icons in Novgorod itself. They show up again and again and again, and
they're all identifiable as this same face.
This type of, yes, the same face. Certain little stylistic things may change. The way that the hair is done may change, but it's always this disembodied head, this face, with the cross behind it usually, as and usually in a square form, so in the form of a handkerchief.
So I don't understand the two-sidedness.
Okay, well, let's go over to the other side. All right, so now we're on the other side of this icon.
Very different.
Very, very different style. Also made in the second half of the 12th century. But this icon is a great example of how multiple styles of icon painting could exist in one location at the same time, and even on the same icon. And it makes it challenging for the student that's studying Russian icons to identify styles that correspond to specific geographic areas, because there was a lot of diversity. But on this side we have the glorification of the cross, which is a totally different subject. It's angels adoring the cross. It's connected to the image of Christ, but totally different from it as well. The two-sidedness of it, it points to how this icon might have been used. It probably would have been put on a stand in a church so that it would have been accessible from both sides. Many icons that were created in medieval Russia were double-sided. Some of them were put on stands so that you could see them from both sides. Some of them were on poles and would be carried in processions. I'm not sure if this one would have been that way or not, because it's fairly large. It's about 2 feet by 2 feet.
Well, I've seen some that were made to go on poles, or have seen some on poles, but I assumed that the pictures on the two sides were very similar or identical. I didn't have any clue that they would be so totally different.
They could be different.
What is the kind of hill thing with maybe a skull?
It is, yeah. What is going on in terms of that is the story goes that the cross was raised on the spot where Adam, the first man, was buried. And so the idea is that the cross is on the hill of Golgotha, and underneath the cross is the skull of Adam. The story goes that way, not necessarily because there's any sort of scientific truth to it as we would understand, but it's much more of a spiritual, metaphorical, bringing the different parts of the biblical story together, connected, so that symbolically we have the old Adam, so the Adam from Genesis, and the new Adam, the new man in Christ. And the connection of their two deaths is associated with this idea of depicting Adam's skull underneath the cross.
Now there's two kind of coin-like pieces on each side of the cross.
I don't know who they are.
They'd be like saints, or?
They're probably some sort of saints. They're very funny looking little images.
And we have the angels that are flying around in the top. There's 2 black ones and 2 red ones.
There's 2 black ones and 2 red ones.
And the red ones have fly swatters.
I think those are scepters. I think those are royal indications of the supreme royalty of Christ.
Oh, okay.
There are different types of angels. I suspect that someone who was a Orthodox believer could probably explain to us better what those specific types of angels are. But I'm not an expert on that.
What is the significance of 3 crossbars on the cross?
That's a good question. Now, this shows up specifically in Russian Orthodox icons. Most Western crosses, you will see either just have the 2 intersecting bars, and sometimes they will have a bar up above the main crossbar. So the main crossbar would have been where Jesus's hands were nailed. The bar at the top above would have been where the inscription Inri, Jesus, King of the Jews, was placed. So that's what that top bar signifies.
Like a nameplate.
Like a nameplate, and it's part of the story of the Passion of Christ. The bottom bar signifies a place where Jesus' feet were nailed. Now this doesn't show up in Western art. It's specifically a very characteristic mark of a Russian cross, is to have this third bar on the bottom, and it's always at an angle. And the idea behind the angle is that when Jesus died, the balance between good and evil was tilted, and the balance between sin and redemption was tilted through his death. And so therefore the spiritual goodness of the world conquered. So that's why the bottom one is tilted. But that's something that you see in on Russian Orthodox churches, on their steeples. You'll see the 3 bars. And any time that it shows up in icons, it's almost always evidence that it's a Russian Orthodox icon.